Greetings everyone, this is Professor Theo Williams. I'd like to take this time to show you this brief video covering some of your responses from discussion number 1 during the forum. First of all, I'd like to say that I appreciate the fact that you all took this first assignment seriously. You did a great job as far as listing out the many cultures that make up your identity, as well as talking briefly about how some of those norms, values, and beliefs within those cultures, how they sometimes complement one another, but how sometimes their differences may even conflict with one another. And what do you do when those conflictions come up? So the first thing I'd like to say, I'd like to appreciate the fact that you all did a great job as far as integrating the book. So you would have quotes and definitions from the book. That lets me know that you're doing a good job as far as learning new terminology and figuring out ways to put those terms in your responses. So I encourage you all to continue to do so. Some initial observations. A couple of you wrote down how you were surprised and excited to realize that you were very cultural, that your identity was not just based upon your race or your gender, but some of you had never looked at culture from the standpoint of what the book talked about and how maybe your religion and maybe different affiliations you're part of, how all those things can tie into who you are as far as your cultural identity. So some of you never thought of that in terms outside of race and ethnicity and gender. So now it's expounded your horizons and expanded your viewpoints, and I think that's very important. Some of you point out that we seem to recognize, highlight, and acknowledge certain cultures within us over others. And what I mean by that is maybe for some people, the fact that they are a male or a female doesn't necessarily stand out as important to them. Maybe their race stands out as what's important. For some people, their race, their skin color is not that important, but maybe the fact that they're a Christian or their religious affiliation is what's most important. And what that basically simply means, and this is according to what the book stated, that certain identities are more salient than others. In other words, that those identities stand out to us more. We notice them more. They're important to us compared to other identities. And sometimes that which is salient to us is pretty consistent, but sometimes it changes based upon the circumstances. For example, me being an African American, that's important to me. Me being a male is also important to me, but I don't think about my maleness all the time. But say if I happen to go somewhere and I'm hanging out with my wife and we're at a party and it's a lot of husbands didn't show up, so it's a lot of wives, and then there's me. At that particular point in time, maybe me being a male becomes more salient. I notice it more at that particular time based upon the environment, based upon the fact that I'm a minority at that particular time. So that's something to keep in mind, that our cultural identities, some seem more important to us at other times versus others, and that's natural. The book talked about the Iceberg model, and some of you talked about this. There were some obvious cultures that you related to as far as your gender, your race, and things of that nature. But a lot of you also talked about cultures that we wouldn't necessarily glean by simply looking at you, but we would have to learn more about you. Maybe your religious beliefs. Some of you talked about family traditions. Some of you talked about some of the values that you hold. Those are things we can't necessarily grasp just by looking at you from a physical appearance standpoint. And that's why relationships are important, that we begin to recognize that there's more that meets the eyes. There's more that goes underneath the surface. And that's what that iceberg model talked about. There's this iceberg above the surface. We can clearly see those things, but the bulk of the iceberg is actually beneath the surface. And that's when we need to dig deep, be introspective, and open ourselves up. That way others can learn more about us that they wouldn't normally know. I thought you all did a great job of expressing how your norms, your values, your beliefs, how they sometimes complement one another. And I think it's a great feeling when we may have 3 or 4 identities that we relate to. And if within those 3 or 4 identities, if there's a constant norm, if there's a constant value, then that value is really affirmed, because it's constant across all those identities. and we feel good, and we know that we're on the right track because as a Christian, I'm taught that I should love each other. As a husband, I'm taught I should love my wife. As an African American male, I'm taught I should be loving of my community. So that love is constant. So we feel better and we're more confident when we have certain attributes, certain norms, certain beliefs that overlap across different identities. However, there are certain times when there are certain norms, values, beliefs that are dissimilar, and sometimes they're even in conflict with one another. For example, as a Christian, I may be taught that, unity is important. The group is important. But sometimes as American, we may have a little bit more individualism. Get what you can get for yourself. So sometimes that clashes. Or as a male, to be tough, be hard, don't cry, don't show emotion, things of that nature. Whereas there may be another culture that says, show that emotion. Be able to connect, open up. And so what do we do when those things contradict one another? And what we often do is we'll choose the one that is more valuable to us, the one that we hold more dearly to, and rightfully so. And lastly, one thing I want to express is that some of you talked about how some of the norms, values, beliefs, and things that you have within certain cultures, how sometimes they change over time. Things that may have been the norm during your parents' day, your grandparents' day within a particular culture may be different nowadays. And so even within the Christian culture, I think about all these changing rules that we have and how we become more lax on certain rules for the sake of being more inclusive. So things that would have been, off limits back in the days, now we say, well, it's not that bad now. Or even within the American society, thinking about divorce. Whereas at one time, divorce was very taboo. You didn't want to get a divorce. Whereas now, divorce is so prevalent, people don't view it the same way. And so sometimes norms, values, beliefs, sometimes they're consistent across the culture, across time. Sometimes they change. And it comes down to whether we think the change is for good or for bad. And that's going to normally determine whether we adapt, whether we adjust, or we stay consistent. Well, those are just some of my few thoughts and highlights from Forum number 1. Remember to take that quiz for chapter 1 this week and continue to read ahead for chapters 2 and 3 for next week. Take care. God bless.